Wall tiling, it can be daunting as a beginner, but in this video I'm going to teach you the basics of how to tile a wall. We'll go over every single part of the process, the application of the tiles, the tools that you need, installation of trims and the grouting process. I'm going to cover every part of the tiling process in this video so that by the end of it you'll be able to tile a wall yourself. So the first step of any tiling job is always going to be wall preparation and setting out so that we know where the tiles are going to go before we even start to fix any in place. There's an old saying in tiling, know where your last tile is going to go before you put the first one on. For surface preparation, follow the guidance on the back of your tile adhesive because that will tell you if you need to prime the surface before you start tiling. Because some surfaces such as timber will need to be primed before we can apply tile adhesive, otherwise the tiles may come away from the wall. However, what we've got today is called Jacko board. This stuff is purposely made for tiling onto, so we don't need to prime the surface. We can tile straight to a tile backer board. For a DIY when you're tiling, it's always good to get the surface nice and flat. That's going to make the job easier for you. If the surface is not plumb, level or flat, i.e. it's got lots of holes in it, then it's going to be really difficult for you to get a good finish. It's going to be a lot easier for a DIY to get a professional looking finish if you're tiling to something nice and flat to start with. When we're setting out for tiling, what I like to do is find the centre of the wall that I'm tiling, and we're going to make a line along the centre of the wall. I didn't install this bathroom, but luckily the person that did has actually put the edge of this Jacko board at dead centre. So I've made a little mark, dead centre. I'm going to run a laser level up that. You don't need one, but it is handy if you've got a laser level. So you can see I've got that laser line running up the wall now, and what that does is gives us a nice line up the wall throughout the job. So laser levels can be really handy for tiling. I'll put a link to one down below in the description. The next bit of setting out is to take a look at the tiles that we're using. So what we're going to do, grab a couple of tiles, we'll dry lay them and see how they look before we apply any adhesive. So you can use a tile measuring gauge for this. You can make one of those out of timber. All I like to do is dry lay the tiles. I can get a good visual reference of where I need to maneuver those tiles that way. So if we mark the halfway point on a tile, so these are 150, 75 with a tile marker, link will be in the description for these. Now I've straddled that centre line, I can see there that that tile's nice and centred. Now I'm dry laying the rest of my tiles all the way into one of the corners. And by dry laying like that, quite simply, we can see that we've got a horrible little sliver of a cut in the corner there. That we don't want. So in that scenario, we move the first tile over so that the edge of the tile runs on the centre line. And then if we bring the other tiles back in, we should have a much better gap. We've now got nearly a full tile. And because we've centred the wall, we're going to have that the other side as well. So we're going to have a nice even gap on each side of the tiles with nice big cuts. That's exactly what we want. Laser level in the eye. The important thing is that you spend some time doing this, because spending time doing this now is going to pay you back massively later on in the job. So now we've done the setting out, we're going to look at how we cut a tile. This is a manual tile cutter. Pick one within your budget. You don't need an expensive one at all. There's plenty out there at the local tile shop that won't cost you very much to get started. They all work in a very similar way. They've got a little disc in here that scores the top of the tile. You then snap the tile in half with the handle. Now sometimes we're going to need to cut awkward shapes like this one here, or small slivers from a tile. Small slivers we can't do with a manual cutter, and of course we can't do awkward shapes with a manual cutter. So all I like to use for this is a grinder with a tile cutting disc. Make sure it's an appropriate tile cutting disc and a good quality one. I'll put links below for a good quality disc in the description. Simply mark the lines that you want to cut with a tile marker, and then you can use your grinder to cut out the sections of tile that you need to cut. So you can see that can be quite a quick and easy way to cut small slivers or intricate pieces from a tile, and using one of those discs gives you a nice clean cut as well. Wet cutters are also available, but they are expensive, and as a DIY probably not something that you're going to want to start off with. We know where we're starting. Now we're going to look at the adhesive. So this is a flexible tile adhesive. It's perfect for what we're doing today. Check out the technical advice on the back of the bags for these. They'll tell you what applications you can use them for. You're also going to want a bucket trowel, a large flexible bucket, and a paddle mixer. You don't need a big one like this. You can just use the ones that attach to drills. And of course, some nice clean water. So if you're doing this for the first time, Don't mix up loads of adhesive at once because it'll just end up going off in the bucket and you're going to struggle to work with it. So mix small batches until you get the hang of it, and then you can start to mix up a little bit more as you get better at tiling. Start by adding water to your bucket first. A couple of inches in the bottom will do, and then you can use the bucket trail to add a few scoops of adhesive. Start to mix that adhesive, and if it's too watery, what you can do is add more adhesive as you go along until you get the correct consistency. When the adhesive starts to stand on its own like that, that's the perfect consistency, nice and creamy, not too thin, because you do want it to be able to hold its shape. We've got our first tiles ready to go from the centre of the wall outward, and we've got our adhesive mixed up. There's a couple more things that we want though. You're going to want a small level handy. This one's covered in tile adhesive, so plenty of use. A good place to start with spacers, 3mm spacers. Grab a big bag of 3mm spacers. They're perfect for wall tiles. And a notch trowel. This is a Ruby 6mm trowel. 6mm is a good place for a DIY to start with a trowel size. So applying adhesive. First thing we want to do is just get it on the wall. We need to get it on there, get good coverage, and then once we've got the adhesive on the wall, I'll show you the pattern that we need to make with those notches so that we can allow the air to escape when we put the tile back to the adhesive. Once we start to get some adhesive on the walls, what we're looking to do is start to make those nice notched lines in one direction. What we don't want is to do that. If we do that, what happens is we trap air within the adhesive, and that causes air bubbles. And what that does is restricts the contact between the tile and the wall. So what we want to do is drag a nice bed of adhesive in one direction, just like that. And that allows air to travel up those notches and escape when we press the tile on. The next thing we need to do with the adhesive on large format tiles is to back butter the tile. Small tiles you don't need to, large format we want to make sure we're getting a good adhesion. So what we do is just get some adhesive on there, and then we just back butter the tile. It is as it sounds, butter it like a bit of bread. And then we can place that tile, and you can see why a laser level's good, because we can still see the line even if we've got adhesive covering a line. If we had a pencil, you could end up with the pencil line covered. And we're going to push that tile on, give it a wiggle. That'll help to get any of them air bubbles out of there. Now what we're going to do, and this might sound a little bit daft, but we're going to pull this first one off the wall again. You can feel that's already started to adhere to the wall, but if we pull it off, we can see we've got good coverage. The notches are sticking all across the tile. We've got no air gaps. And throughout the job, we should actually check every now and again that we're still getting really good coverage. Now it's important that we start as we mean to go on and check the levels of the tiles. If we're tiling off a batten, we'd have a nice level batten to move up the wall. In this case, because of the vertical tiling, we're not using a batten because they're brick patterned. We wouldn't really have a continuous batten to go along. So it's easier to use packers and level our first course. So what we're going to do, this tile needs to move over very slightly at the top. I'm just going to pop a packer under there, and then that should, in fact, it wants to be less than that. 1mm should give us a nice level tile. Now when we get to the edges, we're going to need to cut a tile. To figure out that gap, we could measure it, or we could flip the tile upside down, place it in position, and make a mark on the tile. Don't forget to include 3mm for the spacer. So we've got a little mark on the tile, and then we're going to cut that to fit the gap. As you're going along, if you get adhesive on the tiles, make sure you give them a wipe down. You're probably going to end up with some adhesive on the edges. If you don't take it off now and it goes hard, it makes things harder when you start grouting. So just go along, wipe off anything on the edges. If we're not using a batten, it's especially important that we check that our first course of tiles is nice and level. If we're using a batten, they really should be, but if you're using packers to get the first course level, you're going to need to make sure they're absolutely spot on before you move on. So we do need to pack a couple of these tiles very slowly. The tray we're tiling on must be out a little bit, so we need to bring these up a little bit in the middle. So we'll pack them out, get them level, and then we can move on. And now it's just a case of rinse and repeat as we work our way up the wall. Keep a close eye on the levels of the tiles and the spacings as you work your way up the wall. So that's the first of our 3 walls in this bathroom. Now we're going to look at how to measure and fit tile trims. This is a 10mm tile trim. You can get them in different sizes and different finishes. Make sure you pick one that's the correct thickness for your tiles. Our tiles are 8mm, this being 10mm. Gives us a little bit of room for the adhesive behind, so that once we've got the tile on the wall, it doesn't sit too proud of the edge. To cut the length, best to use a hacksaw and a mitre block. That'll give you a nice sturdy base to cut a nice square and straight line. You can use a grinder, just make sure you get the cut nice and square. Now we'll just tidy that cut end up with a file. So our tile trim is going to finish the edge of this tile here. We've set out for the tiles on this wall, and we know exactly where this last tile is going to finish. Now we're going to make a mark up the edge of that. You can see we've got a line on the wall there. Now I've run a laser level up the wall. I've also got my spirit level. You can use either really. And then all I'm going to do is extend that line all the way up the wall, so that I've got a nice plumb line where the trim is going to sit. You can't quite see it, but if you've got a laser line running up the wall, you could probably skip this step because you already know exactly where that trim is going to sit. Now I've got some adhesive on my trowel, and I'm going to put a little bit of adhesive on the wall about 5mm back from that line. And now we've got our adhesive on, we can just place our trim along the line that we made. The good thing is, because we put the adhesive slightly back from the line, we can still see the line. So now our tile trim's in place, we're going to tile to the trim. The other way you can do this, if you're tiling horizontally, you can actually then pop your trim in before you do the top course of tiles. That's a little bit easier in some circumstances, and it does mean that you don't have to tile so quickly. If we need to make any small adjustments, of course, this is going to go off. So let's get on and get this wall tiled. Before I do that, if you're not subscribed, now's the time, because you don't want to miss out on future videos, and hit like if this video's helped you, because that way it can reach more people on YouTube. Now our tiles are on, we're going to move on to grouting and finishing. So we need to pop out all the spaces, and we need to clear any of the grout joints if there's any little bits of adhesive sticking out of the gaps, because once we grout this, any bits of adhesive that are still on there are going to show through the grout. Now we're going to mix up our grout so we can get it applied to the wall. You need a good quality grout. If you don't know what one to go for, go to your local tile shop or tile supplier and they'll recommend a grout. This is a flexible white grout. It's going to look good with those white tiles. I've got a measuring cup to measure out my grout and a small paddle mixer that goes in a drill. For the application, grout and float and a grout and sponge. Now I've got two nice clean buckets and the key ingredient, bottled water. Bottled water is better than tap water. Tap water, especially in hard areas, can show lime scale marks in dark grout. Granted, we're using white, so it doesn't matter as much, but it's good practice to always use bottled water for that professional finish. A good place to start is a 5:1 mix ratio. So I add my grout and add my water to a clean bucket. I then mix it with a paddle mixer until I've got the correct consistency. So we've got that nice thick paste that we're looking for, but before we use it, we're just going to let it stand for a couple of minutes. Our aim is to get nice full grout joints. That way, especially in a shower area, it's going to be nice and waterproof, and it's going to give us that professional look as well. So we're going to work in small areas, work our way systematically down the wall, fill in the grout joints as we go, and try and work in one direction. You'll find it easier to get air bubbles out of the grout and to fill the joints properly, and it just makes for a nicer, easier and cleaner job. So just remember, small areas at a time. Don't try and take on too much as a beginner, because you'll lose control of the drying times and you'll end up with a lot of mess on the wall, and it could end up that you miss grout joints and things like that. So small areas, and don't overwork the grout, because if you overwork one area, it's like cement, it's going to bring up the water to the surface and it'll actually get harder to work with. So try and do a couple of movements over any one joint and then move on. And remember, it isn't going to look perfectly flat at this stage. Your aim is to reduce the amount of excess grout but have nice full grout joints, and then that sponge is what's going to give us the smooth finish. Once the grout joints start to stiffen up a little bit, we can use a sponge, a good sponge with a rounded edge. What we're going to do is work the sponge across the joints diagonally where possible, so that we don't pull the grout out of the joint. Again, good attention to detail and work in small areas just like we did before. Take off the majority of the grout, just leaving the full grout joints. Just want light pressure, don't push too hard, and work diagonally across the joints. If you accidentally pull out too much grout, repair it now. It's easier to repair it now than later on when the grout's gone hard. Now I'm just doing a second sponge over this, just a light sponge. This second sponge is also going to make it a bit easier when we come back with a microfiber and give this a final polish up. Once the grout's hardened, I go over it with a damp microfiber first. If need be, do that a couple of times, and then I use a dry microfiber to give it a buff and a polish to get that haze off the tiles. Sometimes that takes a couple of goes, but eventually you should get a nice shiny finish. And that only really leaves us one more step. Now the grouting's done, we're going to use a sanitary silicone to finish any corners or edges. You can buy matching colour silicons to your grout. Of course, we've got white grout, so we've got white silicone. But if you're using different colour grouts, you can match the colours to your chosen silicone. I'm going to run a bead of silicone down this corner, show you how to do it, but I do have a dedicated silicone guide and I'll pop that in the description below, so you can head over there when you're finished watching this one and learn how to silicone. At a nice, steady, consistent pace, I run the silicone down the corner. I then use a silicone profiling tool to create a profile and a nice straight line with the silicone. And that leaves us a nice professional looking finish. I'm really happy with that. That's come out really nice. There's loads more to learn, guys. If you've enjoyed this video, hit one of these because you're bound to like them as well. And I'll see you guys in the next one.